The man on your television screen was always calm, always composed, always in control. He stood at the edge of shadow, cigarette balanced between his fingers like a conductor's baton, that famous voice rolling out words that would burrow into the American subconscious and never leave. Words that would echo through generations, that would define what television could be, that would haunt the dreams of millions. "You're traveling through another dimension," he would say, and millions believed him, because Rod Serling spoke with the authority of someone who had actually been there, who had seen things beyond the ordinary, who knew secrets about the human condition that the rest of us were only beginning to suspect. His voice carried weight that other voices did not carry. His certainty was absolute. But here is what the camera never showed you. Behind those measured words was a man who had not slept properly in 15 years. Behind that calm exterior was a heart racing with anxiety that no amount of success could quiet, no amount of acclaim could soothe. Behind those eyes, those famously intense, knowing eyes, were visions of a jungle clearing in the Philippines, where a young paratrooper had watched his best friend die in the most senseless way imaginable, in a way that mocked the very concept of meaning. Rod Serling did not imagine the Twilight Zone. He lived there, every day, every night, every moment, between the performance and the solitude, between the public face and the private terror. He smoked 4 packs of cigarettes daily, as if racing toward an end he could already see written in smoke and ash. He wrote with a fury that suggested he knew time was running out, that every script might be his last. He created 92 episodes of television's most celebrated series in 5 years, a pace that would have destroyed a healthier man, and did destroy him, eventually, inevitably, exactly as he had predicted. This is the story of the man who gave America its nightmares while living inside his own. The story of a war hero who never stopped fighting a battle that had ended decades before. The story of a writer who predicted his own death so accurately that it seems less like coincidence and more like prophecy, less like imagination and more like memory of the future. The Twilight Zone was never fiction. It was confession. And now you will know what Rod Serling was confessing. Rodman Edward Serling was born on December 25, 1924, in Syracuse, New York, a Christmas baby who would spend his life giving gifts to strangers while slowly emptying himself of everything he had. His father, Samuel, was a wholesale butcher who had wanted to be an inventor but settled for practicality, for the steady work that fed a family. His mother, Esther, was a homemaker who recognized something different in her younger son, something that flickered behind his eyes, like a flame that could either illuminate or consume everything it touched. From the beginning, Rod was small, smaller than the other boys in his class, smaller than his older brother Robert. Small in a way that bred either timidity or defiance, and Rod chose defiance with the ferocity of someone who understood instinctively that backing down meant disappearing entirely, that surrender was a form of death. He compensated for his size with words, with performance, with a compulsive need to be seen and heard that would define his entire existence and eventually consume it. By his teenage years he was writing plays for local theater groups, performing in school productions, dreaming of a life beyond Syracuse, beyond the butcher shop, beyond the ordinary existence that seemed to be closing around him like a fist tightening slowly. Then came Pearl Harbor. Rod was 17 when the Japanese attacked. Too young to enlist immediately, but old enough to understand that the world had changed forever, that his generation would be defined by what happened next, that history was calling and would not wait. He counted the months until he could join the fight, impatient with every day that passed in safety while others were dying. On his 18th birthday, Christmas Day 1942, he enlisted in the United States Army. He could have chosen any branch. He could have found a safe assignment, used his intelligence and his way with words to land somewhere behind the lines, somewhere the bullets could not reach. Instead, he volunteered for the Paratroopers, the 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment, the most dangerous assignment available to a soldier who weighed barely 130 pounds and stood 5 feet 4 inches tall. Why? Because Rod Serling had spent his entire life being told he was too small, too slight, too fragile for the rough games other boys played. He was going to prove them wrong or die trying. He very nearly died trying. The 511th Thrift shipped out to the Pacific in 1944. Rod Serling was 19 years old, a boy playing soldier in a war that would kill boys by the hundreds of thousands. He had trained for this moment with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He had dreamed of proving himself in combat, of becoming the hero his small stature had always seemed to deny him. He had no idea what this actually meant. The Philippines campaign was brutal in ways that the European theater was not, in ways that no training could prepare anyone for. The jungle rot that ate through boots and skin until soldiers could barely walk. The diseases that killed as efficiently as Japanese bullets, that struck without warning and showed no mercy. The close-quarters combat where you could see the face of the man you were killing, could smell his breath, could hear his final words in a language you did not understand but understood completely. But nothing prepared Rod for what happened on the day that would haunt him for the rest of his life, that would shape everything he wrote and everything he became. His unit was conducting an operation near Manila. The details vary depending on who tells the story. Rod himself told different versions over the years, not because he was lying, but because trauma reshapes memory into something survivable, something the mind can contain without shattering. What remains consistent across every telling is this. There was a man named Melvin Levy. He was Rod's friend, one of the few who had become close in the strange intimacy of combat. He was Jewish like Rod. He was standing in an open area, laughing at something someone had said when it happened. Some accounts say it was a food crate dropped from a supply plane, tumbling from the sky like a gift from an indifferent god. Some say it was something else falling from above. What matters is this: Melvin Levy was killed by something that should not have killed anyone. Not enemy fire, not combat. Something absurd, something random, something that made no sense whatsoever, that mocked the very idea that sense existed in the universe. Rod watched it happen. He saw his friend alive, laughing, full of plans for after the war, and then he saw his friend dead, and the space between those two states was filled with nothing but senseless chance. There was no meaning, no purpose, no reason, just a man existing one moment and erased the next, eliminated by the arbitrary cruelty of a universe that did not care about individual lives, that could not be bargained with or understood. That moment broke something in Rod Serling that would never fully heal, that would bleed through every word he ever wrote. The war ended. Rod came home, but home was a foreign country now, populated by people who had not seen what he had seen, who could not understand why he woke screaming in the night, why he flinched at sudden sounds, why he could not stop talking about meaning and purpose and the randomness of death, while everyone else just wanted to forget and move forward. He tried to return to normal life with the determination of someone who has no other options. He enrolled at Antioch College in Ohio on the GI Bill, surrounded by other veterans who shared his nightmares but never spoke of them. He married his college sweetheart, Carol, a woman who would spend the next 3 decades watching her husband fight battles that existed only in his mind, that she could not see but could feel. He had 2 daughters. He bought a house. He did everything a returning veteran was supposed to do. But the war would not leave him alone. The war had taken up residence inside him and refused to pay rent. He began writing compulsively, desperately, as if the words could somehow exorcise the demons that lived inside him. His early work was raw with trauma. Stories about soldiers who could not escape their memories, about men destroyed by experiences they could not articulate, about the impossibility of returning to innocence once you had seen what human beings could do to each other and what the universe could do to human beings. The stories were too honest, too painful, too real for an America that wanted to celebrate victory, not examine its costs. Editors rejected them. Producers turned them down. The entertainment industry of the early 1950s wanted escapism, not confrontation. They wanted to forget the war, not remember it in all its senseless horror. Rod Serling learned his first lesson about American storytelling. The truth was not welcome here. If he wanted to be heard, he would have to find another way to speak. By 1955, Rod Serling had established himself as one of television's most promising writers. His teleplays for anthology series like Craft Television Theatre had earned him recognition and, more importantly, had given him a platform from which to say the things he needed to say, the things that burned inside him, demanding release. But saying those things came at a cost that increased with every word. His script patterns about corporate ruthlessness and moral compromise became a sensation that surprised everyone, including Rod. It was the first television program ever to be restaged due to popular demand, broadcast twice because viewers demanded to see it again. Critics hailed it as a breakthrough, proof that the new medium could tackle serious subjects with sophistication and depth. The sponsors were less enthusiastic. Television in the 1950s was controlled by advertisers with absolute power over content, power they exercised without hesitation or apology. If a cigarette company did not like a script, the script was changed or it did not air. If a car manufacturer objected to a storyline, the storyline disappeared without trace. Writers were employees, and employees did what they were told or found themselves unemployed. Rod Serling refused to do what he was told. Something in him, maybe the war, maybe his size, maybe the defiance that had defined him since childhood, would not permit surrender. He fought constantly with sponsors and network executives who wanted to soften his work, to remove anything that might offend anyone, to transform his pointed social commentary into bland entertainment that sold products without disturbing anyone's sleep. He became known as difficult, demanding, impossible to work with, labels that he wore as badges of honor rather than marks of shame. "I don't want to be a hack," he said in interviews, his voice carrying the intensity of someone who had seen friends die for no reason and could not bear to see his words die for no reason either. "I didn't survive the war to come home and write pablum for people who don't want to think, but the most devastating battle was yet to come." In 1955, a 14-year-old black boy named Emmett Till was murdered in Mississippi for allegedly whistling at a white woman. His killers were acquitted by an all-white jury in less than an hour. The case became a flashpoint for the emerging civil rights movement, and Rod Serling decided he was going to write about it, decided he was going to make America look at what it had done. His script was called Noon on Doomsday. It told the story of a murder in the South, of a community that protected the killers, of justice denied because of prejudice and fear. It was exactly the kind of story that needed to be told, exactly the kind of story that American television had never told and was terrified to tell. The sponsor, the United States Steel Corporation, objected immediately and forcefully. They did not want their products associated with controversy. They did not want to offend Southern customers. They did not want anything that might complicate their sales figures. The network, ABC, backed them completely and without hesitation. Rod was ordered to make changes. He refused. They insisted. He fought with every weapon he had, which was words, only words. He lost. By the time Noon on Doomsday finally aired, the victim had been changed from black to foreign. The setting had been moved from the South to New England. Every element that connected the story to Emmett Till had been surgically removed, leaving behind a hollow shell that said nothing about anything that mattered. Rod Serling watched the broadcast in despair that bordered on physical illness. Everything he had tried to say had been silenced. The truth he had wanted to tell had been erased as thoroughly as if it had never existed. The sponsors had won again, as sponsors always won in the television industry of the 1950s. He learned his second lesson about American storytelling. If you wanted to tell the truth, you could not tell it directly. You had to disguise it. You had to hide it inside something that looked like entertainment, but was actually subversion. You had to find a zone between reality and fantasy, where the censors could not follow. You had to create the Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone premiered on October 2, 1959, and nothing on television would ever be the same again. Rod Serling had found his disguise, his Trojan horse, his way past the gates: science fiction, fantasy, the supernatural, stories about aliens and time travel and strange dimensions where the ordinary rules did not apply. The sponsors could not object to social commentary if it was wrapped in the clothing of genre fiction, or so Rod hoped, so Rod gambled. He was right. Week after week, the Twilight Zone aired episodes that were really about racism, conformity, nuclear paranoia, McCarthyism, and the thousand small cruelties that defined American life in the early 1960s. Rod hid his messages inside tales of Martians and monsters, and America consumed them without realizing they were being challenged, being questioned, being asked to look at themselves more honestly than they ever had before. The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street was about suburban paranoia and the ease with which neighbors could turn on each other. But it was also about McCarthyism, about how fear could transform ordinary people into mobs. The Eye of the Beholder was about a woman whose face was considered hideously ugly until the final reveal showed that she was beautiful by our standards, and the normal people around her were grotesque. It was about conformity, about the violence of enforced normalcy, about who gets to decide what is acceptable and what must be destroyed. Episode after episode, Rod smuggled radical ideas past the censors who did not recognize them. He spoke about race without mentioning race. He condemned war without showing battlefields. He critiqued American society while appearing to tell stories about dimensions that did not exist. But the work was consuming him. Every script was a piece of himself torn away and offered to strangers. Rod Serling wrote 92 of the Twilight Zone's 156 episodes himself. 92 scripts in 5 years, an output that would be considered impossible today, that was considered extraordinary even then. He wrote in hotel rooms, on airplanes, in the middle of the night when sleep would not come and the nightmares were waiting. He wrote as if demons were chasing him, and in a sense they were. They had been chasing him since Manila. The cigarettes multiplied, 4 packs a day, 100 cigarettes between waking and sleeping, each one a tiny act of self-destruction that he could not or would not stop. His hands shook when he was not smoking. His voice grew rougher with each passing year. His face aged visibly from season to season, the stress-carving lines that makeup could not hide, that the camera recorded faithfully. His family saw him disappearing into his work, into himself. Carol, his wife, managed the household alone while Rod locked himself in his office for days at a time. His daughters knew their father as a presence more than a person, someone who was always working, always writing, always somewhere else, even when he was physically present in the same room. He would come home from the studio, Carol recalled years later, and I could see that he wasn't really home. Part of him was still in the zone. Part of him was always in the zone. I'm not sure he ever fully came back to us, and still the nightmares continued, night after night. The war would not release him. Every explosion he wrote echoed the explosions he had survived. Every death he scripted was a reflection of deaths he had witnessed. Every episode about loss and grief and the randomness of fate was a letter from the jungle clearing where Melvin Levy had died for no reason at all. Rod Serling was strip mining his own trauma for entertainment, and the mine was running dry. In 1961, Rod Serling wrote an episode called Nothing in the Dark. It told the story of an old woman terrified of death, who has locked herself away from the world to avoid him. Death, played by a young Robert Redford, eventually finds her anyway, but he is gentle, kind, nothing like she feared. The episode ends with her accepting his hand, walking with him into the light, at peace at last. Rod Serling was 37 years old when he wrote it. He had already had his first heart attack. The heart attack came without warning, but not without cause. The doctors told him to stop smoking. He did not stop. They told him to reduce his stress, to slow down, to take care of himself. He did not reduce it. They told him he was killing himself, that his heart could not sustain the pace he had set. He already knew. He had known for years. "I know how this story ends," he told a friend in a moment of uncharacteristic honesty. "I've written it enough times." The protagonist ignores all the warnings. He keeps doing what he's doing because he doesn't know how to be anyone else. And then the bill comes due. The bill came due on June 28th. Rod Serling was 50 years old. He was on an operating table at Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester, New York, undergoing open-heart surgery. The doctors had warned him that the surgery was risky. His heart had been damaged by decades of smoking and stress, and the relentless pace of his work, by years of ignoring every warning his body had given him. The surgery failed. Rod Serling died on the table, his heart finally giving out, the ending he had predicted arriving exactly on schedule. Look back at the Twilight Zone now, knowing what we know about Rod Serling's life, and the episodes transform into something else entirely. They become an autobiography disguised as fiction. They become a man speaking directly to us from the depths of his own darkness. Walking Distance tells the story of a man who travels back to his childhood hometown, desperate to recapture the innocence he has lost. Rod wrote it about himself, about the Syracuse of his youth, about the boy he had been before the war, about the impossibility of returning to who you were before you saw what you saw. A Stop at Willoughby features a man crushed by the pressure of his job, who dreams of escaping to a peaceful small town from another era. In the end, he leaps from a train to reach Willoughby and dies. The episode was about Rod's own exhaustion, his own longing for escape, his own awareness that the only way out of his life might be the final way. The Purple Testament follows a soldier who can see death in the faces of men who are about to die. It was the most directly autobiographical episode Rod ever wrote, a story about surviving when others did not, about the guilt of living when friends are gone, about the war that never ended because it had taken up permanent residence inside him. Rod Serling spent 5 years telling America stories about strange dimensions and impossible situations. What America did not realize was that every story was about him. Every monster was his monster. Every death was the death he was racing toward. Rod Serling has been dead for 50 years. The Twilight Zone ended its original run more than 60 years ago, and yet both remain more relevant, more watched, more discussed than almost anything else from that era of television. Why? Because Rod Serling understood something that most writers never grasp. The best fiction is not about escaping reality, but about confronting it. The monsters in the Twilight Zone were never really aliens or demons or supernatural creatures. They were us, our fears, our prejudices, our capacity for cruelty, and our desperate need for meaning in a meaningless universe. He gave us permission to look at ourselves through the safe distance of fantasy. He showed us the darkness inside ordinary people without lecturing or moralizing. He trusted his audience to understand what he was really saying, even when the censors did not. Every writer who has used genre fiction to tell hard truths owes a debt to Rod Serling. Every television show that takes its audience seriously, that refuses to dumb down its content, that believes entertainment can also be art, they are all his children. He just could not prove it was possible to survive the telling. There is a dimension beyond that which is known to man. Rod Serling said those words hundreds of times, introducing episodes that would burrow into the American psyche and never leave. What he did not say, what he could not say, because it would have been too honest, too raw, too personal, was that he lived in that dimension every day. The dimension of memory, the dimension of trauma, the dimension where a boy from Syracuse watched his friend die in a jungle clearing and spent the rest of his life trying to understand why. The Twilight Zone was not fantasy. It was survival. It was a man screaming into the darkness and shaping that scream into stories that millions could hear. It was therapy broadcast to the nation, a confession disguised as entertainment. Rod Serling died at 50, too young, too soon, but perhaps he knew, had always known that his story would not be a long one. The next time you watch The Twilight Zone, the next time you hear that famous voice emerge from the shadows, remember what you now know. Remember Rod Serling. He traveled through another dimension. He never came back, but he left us maps to territories of the human soul that no one had charted before. That is his legacy, and now you know the price he paid for it. The man on your television screen was never calm. He was terrified. He was haunted. He was running from something that would catch him eventually, and he knew it. But he kept talking anyway. He kept writing. He kept creating stories that mattered, that challenged, that refused to let America sleep comfortably through the night. Rod Serling gave us The Twilight Zone. In exchange, the Zone took everything he had, submitted for your approval, the story of a man who saw too much and said too much and burned too brightly. You have just read the truth. You have exited the Twilight Zone.